Hey, what's going on, everyone? It's Kyle Henderson along with Andrew Bone of BamaInsider.com coming to you from beautiful Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Definitely hit the thumbs up, like, subscribe. We appreciate you more than you know. Here with Andrew Bone to talk Alabama Crimson Tide football recruiting. And we lead off talking about Kobe Prentice, who decommitted from Maryland. Bone, your thoughts on Kobe Prentice now that he has decommitted from Maryland? What does it look like for Alabama?
Well, I think it's a good sign for the Crimson Tide, especially with him getting that offer from Alabama a few weeks ago, and then he decommits from Maryland, shortly after. So, not really surprised by that. We spoke with Kobe the night that he received his offer from Alabama, and certainly felt like he was probably on the verge of flipping to the Crimson Tide. Now, he waited a few weeks before he reopened his recruitment, and he hasn't technically committed to Alabama just yet. So, it is something that we are worth watching very closely. But, this is a prime example of why Alabama has decided to waited until the summer to evaluate these kids, to get these kids on campus, to work them out, to test them, to get their height and weights. And there were so many top wide receivers who visited Alabama this summer. And, you look back at last year's recruiting class, Alabama signed 4 Rivals 100 wide receivers. Going into this year's class, how are they going to be able to, max out? Were they going to be able to, sign 3 or 4 elite wide receivers? And they had a lot of top talent in Tuscaloosa over the course of the whole month of June. Evaluated a lot of guys who were 5 stars, top 100 type players, Rivals 250 type players. Then you bring in a guy like Kobe Prentice, who not a lot of people knew about, didn't have a ton of offers, but goes to Alabama's camp, weighs in at measures in at 5'11", about 178 pounds, and runs a 4.38 in the 40. Wow. And just was absolutely phenomenal at Alabama's football camp. And it's not just that. You're not just measuring a guy. You're not just getting a height and weight, getting a 40 time on them. You're working them out. You're putting them through all the drills that you're putting your team, your players through, throughout the course of the year. You're trying to see, can they handle this type of coaching? Can they play at this type of level? When you evaluate all those guys, work them out, put them through camp, and test them, when they sit down after all the camps are over and start narrowing it down, all right, who's going to be our top tier targets at this position? Kobe Prentice became one of those top tier targets, and certainly somebody that they want in their recruiting class. Will that happen sometime soon? I think it will.
Here with Andrew Bone talking Alabama Crimson Tide football recruiting. Definitely hit the thumbs up, like, subscribe. We appreciate you more than you know. Bone, will a likely commitment from Kobe Prentice create some sort of a domino effect for other top wide receivers for the class of 2022 for Alabama?
Well, I think it will. As we said, there's not a lot of receiver spots in this year's class. I think there's probably, going to be 4 wide receivers taken this year. We were kind of thinking 3 originally, but I think after this summer, seeing the amount of players that had visited Alabama and, guys who, we feel like probably are leaning towards Alabama, they're probably going to take 4 receivers in this year's class. Now, Kobe Prentice, he is potentially going to commit relatively soon. And I certainly think with some other receiver targets that are out there, we'll probably see some more decisions happen. Now, Barian Brown out of Nashville, Rivals 100 receiver that we've talked about for a long time on this show. Talked about as a big time target for the Crimson Tide. He took an official visit in early June. I certainly think that Alabama has a great chance to land his commitment, and he's going to be making a decision over the course of the next month and a half, but definitely before his senior season begins. So we're certainly going to be watching Barian Brown as he gets ready to announce his decision. Now, there's a few receivers in the state of Louisiana who we've talked about, Shaz Preston, also Kendrick Law, and Aaron Anderson. Aaron Anderson, the only one who's committed out of that group right now. Aaron Anderson committed to LSU, but visited Alabama 3 times in the month of June. So there's definitely some strong interest there. I'd be surprised if Alabama did not get one of those three players. I just think that, with those guys having a lot of interest in Alabama, certainly trying to get, at least one of them, I think they can. Kendrick Law, we talked about him a good bit last week as potentially making a decision here pretty soon. Now, just from talking to some sources close to him, it feels like he may wait a little bit longer, but we'll watch him pretty closely just in case, let's say Kobe Prentice jumps on board. Let's say Barian Brown jumps on board. Does this mean somebody else has a lot of pressure to make that decision? Because as we know, Evan Stewart out in Texas is going to wait a while. He's going to wait until the fall, maybe not until after his senior season before he makes a decision. We know Evan Stewart's one of Alabama's top wide receiver targets and is going to have a spot on Alabama's 2022 recruiting class until he decides to make that decision. So, he's certainly going to I think some of these other wide receivers are certainly going to start to feel a little bit of pressure to maybe make some decisions. Amari Kelly, who we've talked about, an in-state wide receiver out of Hewitt-Trussville, he's another guy that Alabama worked out during the summer and was really impressed with. So have to kind of see what happens with him as well. But Kobe Prentice jumps on board, it certainly can create a domino effect for some of these other wide receiver targets. And, Isaiah Bond, another wide receiver who's out there who took an official visit to Alabama. Now, he is committed to Florida, but that doesn't mean that Alabama has stopped recruiting him at all. So, he's certainly, a guy who's still in play as well. But there's some other receivers who are out there. Those are kind of the main ones that we talked about over the course of the last few months and, kind of what the receiver board, really looks like at this time. But I certainly think if Kobe Prentice jumps on board, Barian Brown jumps on board in the next month or so, that's two commitments. That would be two commitments at the wide receiver position. You're still waiting on Evan Stewart. Will that put some pressure on one of these other guys to potentially make a decision within the next, couple of, I'd say a couple of weeks, but, within the next month or so?
Here with Andrew Bone talking Alabama Crimson Tide football recruiting. My name is Kyle Henderson. Definitely hit the thumbs up, like, subscribe. Bone. I mean, people, probably freaking out like they did last year, probably not so much. I mean, I think when we looked to last year's class and they were ranked like 72nd or whatever in rivals. And I know people, complain about whatever rankings we use, but, for the sake of the show, we're looking at the rivals team rankings right now. You see Ohio State up at number 1, Alabama all the way down at 12. Clearly not time to panic. And we saw last year what Nick Saban was able to do as we kind of zoom in on the class overall. You see that there are 10 total commitments in this class. Most recently, Jeremiah Alexander on your screen, top left of your screen. Before him, it was Antonio Kite. Bone, as we kind of talk more about this recruiting class, I mean, Alabama, as you know, has some good momentum right now. Do you feel that, but beyond Kobe Prentice, who could be on commitment watch, who are some other prospects that could be committing soon within this time frame of the month of July?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of guys that we're keeping a very close eye on. I mean, we mentioned the wide receivers right there who, if Kobe Prentice jumps on board, where it may create a domino effect, will somebody, maybe like Jaleel Skinner at the tight end position potentially, make a decision within the next, few weeks. I think that's very possible. He's certainly a guy that, Alabama likes a lot and visited Tuscaloosa last month and, has shown a tremendous amount of interest. Offensive line-wise, we know that Dane Shore is going to be announcing his decision on July the 31st. I still think Alabama probably in the driver's seat for him at this time. But will somebody like Tyler Booker from IMG Academy also make a decision? I still think it's very possible that he makes a decision before the start of his senior season. And then, you're looking over on the defense side of the ball. Who's going to be that next guy to jump on board? Is it going to be somebody like Denver Harris? I think that's always a strong possibility. Defensive line wise, most of these defensive linemen, and we'll get into defensive linemen a little bit more, but most of the defensive line targets who are out there plan on waiting a while. But one guy in particular that I still think could make a decision this summer is Justice Finkley, 4-star defensive lineman from Hewitt-Trussville. Now, he hasn't said when he's going to make a decision just yet, but he took 4 official visits in the month of June. Did not take an official visit to Alabama, but when he narrowed down his list of top 3 schools, it was Alabama, Texas, in Colorado. So would not be surprised if we saw Justice go ahead with a decision before the start of his senior season, but nothing set in stone just yet. So there's certainly a lot of guys who are out there that could make decisions, but it's certainly a lot of guys who haven't necessarily scheduled commitment dates just yet.
Here with Andrew Bone talking Alabama Crimson Tide football recruiting. Definitely hit the thumbs up, like, subscribe. We appreciate you more than you know. Next week, it's going to be an action-packed week as SEC Media Day comes to Hoover, Alabama. So our staff at BamaInsider.com will have everything you need from SEC Media Day. So definitely hit the subscription button so you never miss when we drop a video right here on BamaInsider.com. Bone, 5-star defensive tackle Walton Nolan announced his top 5 late last week. Does Alabama have a legit shot with Nolan? And when do you expect him to make his final decision?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly believe Alabama's in the mix. Obviously being in the top 5, but sometimes schools are just kind of thrown in there, and it's really between 2 or 3 schools. But I certainly believe that Alabama is a very strong contender for Walton Nolan. He spent a few days in Tuscaloosa last month just on an unofficial visit, and he'll be taking an official visit later in the fall. I think he's going to take his official visit the weekend of the LSU game. So obviously big to get him back on campus for an unbelievable environment. But yeah, I mean, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Michigan, LSU, top 5 schools all battling out for Walter Nolan. I think he's probably going to wait until a little bit closer to signing day before making that decision. But he's certainly one of Alabama's top defensive line targets, and I think he had a great visit to Tuscaloosa, a few weeks ago.
Bone, as we talk more about defensive linemen and top targets on the defensive side of the ball, specifically with the defensive line, you recently dropped your big board. It seemed like a majority of Alabama's defensive line targets will wait to announce their decision till this fall. Not a big deal, but who are some names that Alabama fans need to continue to watch on the recruiting trail from the defensive line perspective?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. A lot of these guys took all their official visits in the month of June, and everyone just kind of assumed, well, they took their official visits, they got to make a decision next. Well, as we've been saying for the last couple of weeks now, a lot of these kids took their official visits, but then they kind of realized, hey, wait a minute, this is our first ever visit to a college campus. We want to see it a little bit more. We want to go to some games this fall before we make decisions. So we're starting to see a lot more kids push decisions back, wait until the fall so they can go to games, experience the game day atmosphere. And you know what? Maybe even experience Nick Saban or any other head coach in the country coming into their home and sitting down with them for an in-home visit before they make their decision. I think a lot of fans are forgetting that part of the process. We used to see, kids go to junior days and they go to spring games and they take their summer visits, go into the fall, go to games, take official visits, do in-home visits. Everyone just wanted all these kids to make their decisions as soon as they got done taking just their official visits. So we're starting to see kids push things back a little bit, enjoy their recruitment because, frankly, they can. A lot of these top guys who are out there, especially guys that are, high on Alabama's recruiting board, Alabama's not pressing for kids to make decisions just yet. I know people probably think that. That's when you lose recruits. You don't win recruits by saying, hey, we need you to commit right now to make sure our class looks a little bit better heading into the fall. That doesn't happen at all. Now, maybe it puts a little pressure on some kids, like let's say at receiver, if there's 2 or 3 commitments and you only have 4 spots. But when you have 4 or 5 spots still remaining on the defensive front, you don't press those kids to commit. You wait for those kids all the way until the fall, all the way until they get ready to make their decision. So they always feel like, I was never pressed by that school to make a decision. They waited for me until I was ready to commit. Now, some, could make decisions, but most of them are going to wait. But, we talked about Walter Nolan. Bear Alexander, another 5-star defensive tackle who visited Alabama back in June. Certainly a kid that is going to wait it out and going to be a long, drawn-out process for him. He committed to Georgia back in February, but then reopened his recruitment. Amari Abor and Anthony Lucas, 2 big defensive ends who visited Tuscaloosa back in that last weekend of June. I think Alabama has a great chance with both of those players, and they're going to be visiting again in the fall. Anthony Lucas says that he's going to visit, I believe, the LSU weekend. Amari Abor says that he's probably gonna visit during the fall, but didn't say when. Says it might be the LSU game, maybe another game. So we'll just have to kind of wait and see what goes on there. But those are certainly some of the top guys on Alabama's recruiting board. And we talked about Justice Finkley earlier in the show. Could make a decision this summer. Could be a little bit further into the fall. But, those are certainly some of the top guys. And we have a lot more guys that we are talking about on Bama Insider, on the Alabama defensive line big board. They're certainly continuing to recruit and could potentially be in Alabama's recruiting class.
Bone, finally, kind of as we get to the end of the show here, we just saw Kobe Prentice reopen his commitment last night. Who are some other top players committed elsewhere, still in play for Alabama? And is Alabama possibly in danger of losing the commitment? So let's kind of talk about Flip Watch, not only for Alabama, but maybe there's some Alabama targets that are having second thoughts about, kind of their career going forward. So Flip Watch as we end the segment.
Yeah, we talked about Isaiah Bond earlier in the show, Florida commitment that took an official visit to Alabama. So we're always kind of keeping an eye on him. But I think Alabama ends up getting a commitment from Kobe Prentice, potentially Barry and Brown. I'm not saying that it eliminates his spot, but it makes things, puts a little bit of pressure on him. And I don't know if he's going to be one of those guys who's going to feel any pressure and, who wants to feel any pressure and flip to another program. If he were to flip, I think it'd be a little bit later on in the year, maybe after he attends some games. But as of right now, still very solid with his commitment to Florida. Damani Jackson, 5-star defensive back out of California, Mater Dei High School, is committed to USC, been committed to USC since January, and definitely somebody that Alabama has a lot of interest in. He took an unofficial visit to Alabama back in June. Still can use that official visit to Alabama, so we'll see if he makes that trip to Tuscaloosa sometime in the fall. As of right now, very solid with his commitment to USC. Probably the one guy I'm watching closely, probably more so than anybody over the course of the next few months that's committed somewhere, is Shamar James, outside linebacker from Faith Academy down in Mobile. Certainly a guy that Alabama wants in its recruiting class, one of its top linebacker targets. I think many were surprised. I was surprised. I know Alabama was surprised. Florida reporters were probably surprised when Shamar committed to Florida over Alabama back in June during his official visit. Now, we know that Alabama is still pressing for him, that he's still in communication with the Crimson Tide. And, in the end, I think Alabama is going to have a great chance to get him back in the fold. So, we're certainly going to be watching Shamar James a lot moving forward. Now, in terms of guys who are committed to Alabama right now, still looking around, still visiting some other schools. Le'Veon Moss committed to Alabama in early June after his official visit, but we saw him take several visits to different schools in the month of June. Texas A&M, LSU, Ole Miss, kind of got around TCU. So how solid is his commitment? He's a guy that doesn't really talk to anybody, has been very quiet regarding his recruitment. I don't think he's even really talked about his commitment to Alabama just yet. So it's kind of interesting kind of see what goes on. But sometimes kids just, don't talk to the media. It doesn't mean they're going to flip. But, I think a lot of certain fans, certainly think that that he's on flip watch. So I'm not there yet. I think he's still pretty solid with his commitment, but he is somebody that we're going to be watching moving forward to see if he potentially takes some more visits this fall. But as of right now, still committed to Alabama. Another guy, Jaheim Otis, big Otis, 6'6", 360 plus pounds, defensive tackle out of Mississippi. Definitely somebody that Alabama is very impressed with. They really liked a lot when he came to campus earlier this summer. Definitely somebody that is a absolute mountain of a man. I think that he's got a chance to really develop into something special. But he did take some visits in the month of June outside of Alabama. Visited Ole Miss, Mississippi State, and I think both of those programs are certainly putting a lot of in-state pressure on him to stay a little bit closer to home. But as of right now, not really seeing him flip. I think he's very high on Alabama. Loves the development of defensive linemen in Tuscaloosa, and he's been visiting Alabama really since his 8th grade year. So definitely high interest in Alabama. And as of right now, I think he sticks with the Tide. But we'll obviously continue to watch his recruitment moving forward, and certainly watch Le'Veon Moss as well. But yeah, I mean, those are probably the only two right now that I can see flipping their decisions. Well, I don't even want to say I see them flipping their decisions. Let's just say other schools are certainly trying to pry them away from the Crimson Tide at this point.
That's how it works in the recruiting landscape, right? I mean, you got to go after the targets who are committed to Alabama. Bone, good stuff. It's good to wrap with you as we get to this middle of the month of July. Remember, SEC Media Day is coming up from Hoover, Alabama. So you'll get coverage from BamaInsider.com from Monday through Thursday of next week. And of course, coverage every day right here on BamaInsider.com. A couple additional notes. We did bring on Trey Yanity full time. So you're seeing a lot of content production from him. So definitely support his videos. Bone's still doing his thing recruiting wise. And Tony is our team writer back at BamaInsider.com. We will add Mick Gillespie back starting in August of 2021. So we'll get back to our usual schedule with our live shows and whatnot coming in the month of August. So stay tuned for plenty of coverage right here on BamaInsider.com. He's Andrew Bone. I'm Kyle Henderson. Thank you very much for supporting our channel. Hit the thumbs up, like, subscribe, hit the join button at the bottom of this video. Another way to support our staff right here on BamaInsider.com.